Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. And today we're going to continue our series of book reviews that deal with marketing in an age where data and privacy collide. Let's get straight to it. When a person interacts with their device or goes online, who owns their data? Today's guest says they do, and that marketers should be paying them for the privilege. Now, right now, you might think that this person wears hats made out of tinfoil. Well, it might surprise you to learn that they are, in their day job, the global head of AI at Ernst & Young. Having also been an analytics executive at Gartner and CSL Behring, and having graduated from DePaul with an MBA. Today's guest has written 4 books, and I found out about him through his 2020 book, Building Analytics Teams, which led to him being a guest on this show back in 2023. He recently released a book called Data for All, which spurs this repeat appearance. Only a handful of people have had the distinction of coming on this podcast more than once. Joining from Chicago, let's go talk to John Thompson. I'm really excited to welcome back John Thompson. Welcome to Funnel Reboot.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Glenn.
Sure. So we had, and I will put it in the show notes, a great conversation about your previous book, Building Analytics Teams. And here we're going to talk about a different book. Could you please tell me what the name of that book is?
Yeah, that book is called Data for All. It came out in March of 2023.
Fantastic. So we'll get into what it talks about, but I have to just note for a moment, it's kind of hilarious that we've got, 2 people who work in data analytics who are about to delve into why we should not have as much data as we do.
Yeah, a little ironic, isn't it?
Yep. So I'm sure we'll get in at some point to, a bit of the backstory. You share some personal anecdotes, which kind of, helped germinate the idea for the book. But I first want to acknowledge that we have been accumulating data, no matter which part of the commercial world you're talking about, but we've been accumulating it for a very long time. You take us back a century to a guy named Arthur Nielsen. Could you tell us just a bit about him?
Yeah, Arthur was a guy that lived in the Chicago area. He, was interested in understanding the world from a data perspective. And he went around and spoke to shopkeepers and grocery store owners and said, hey, why don't you give me all the data on all the products you sell? And, I'll help you a little bit in understanding, where products are going and how long they're on the shelves and different things like that. And the shopkeepers said, yeah, this is a great idea. And they gave him the data. And that was the beginning of how we think about data, is that the shopkeepers gave it away for free. And Arthur just asked for it. So that's where we started.
That's right. So it had zero value. We're literally talking about the little grocery receipts, itemized receipts. And basically the consumer gets a copy, but Arthur got a copy.
That's right.
So
That's right.
if we look at it in economic value, we would think to ourselves, it is a discard. It is completely... It's like exhaust out of a car. It doesn't have any value to anyone. And yet, maybe people have heard of Arthur's actual company, the AC Nielsen Company.
That's right.
Right, which is now legendary for its ratings and tracking across all kinds of media to give that data economic value that clearly does well for them. When we're trying to figure out what that did to consumers. Like, it seems really innocuous at the beginning, doesn't it? But you called it disempowering. You said that, when they saw little things like a coupon in their local penny saver newspaper, and they would take it into the store and then that would get rung through the register. Point of sale would then go to Nielsen. Nielsen would then report back to the grocery firm. All of this stuff is happening and the consumer is part of it, but you say that they're disempowered. They just save some money. Help us understand where that disempowering comes in.
Yeah, they're saving, like you said in the description. I know penny saver is a real name. It's a proper noun, but you are saving pennies. And when you look at the AC Nielsen company and their annual revenue and Mark Zuckerberg's income and the amount of land he owns on Kauai, who's getting the better deal?
So this is where you're helping us understand it has a non-zero value, like nowhere close to zero.
Nowhere close. Nowhere close. I like to tell the story of, if you're running a company, you have to pay for all your raw materials. And if you were hiring someone to build you a house, they would have to pay for the lumber. And ultimately, you would have to pay for the lumber. Many of the companies that we think about today, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Meta, whatever, they don't pay for a lot of their raw materials. The data from us is what they use, and they're not paying for it, and they're making billions off it. So my point is, that's not fair.
Yes. So we're generating it. We're doing that just in the process of living our lives. And if I think of it on a spectrum, the way that, we kind of look at this status quo of how we get here is we can either be full participants and kind of by that same token, give away all of our privacy, right? Just let these companies, kind of with the throttle fully open, take up this data that we are spinning off and using it however they wish. Or an extreme example would be, let's say, a person that goes out into a cabin in the woods. And, we all know from the last decade or two that there were one or two very famous examples of people like Ted Kaczynski that did that. And we consider them to be tinfoil hat wearing, Nimrods. So help me, John. I mean, are we at either end of this pole, or are we going to be somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I think we're going to be somewhere in the middle. I mean, the whole point of the book was to bring awareness to data and what happens with data and how you're generating this data and what it could mean in your life and what it should mean in your life. I'm not in the book, you've read it, Glenn. I'm not telling anybody to do anything that they don't want to do. I'm not saying don't use Gmail. I'm not saying don't use Meta. I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is I want people to be aware of the, as you said, non-zero value of their data and what that data can be and what it can do for them and what is one possible future of where you can get a data dividend. You can actually make money from your data. Now, I'm not saying that's the only future that's out there. There's plenty of different ways this could play out over the next 3 to 5 years. But what I'm trying to do with the book is I'm trying to raise the awareness that your data has value and you can control how that data is generated, where it goes, who uses it. And you can start out by changing your mindset about who owns that data. Now, I speak in front of a lot of groups, and I always ask the question, how many people in this room believe that they own the data they generate? Almost no one raises their hands. Everybody thinks that the companies that have the data own the data. And the bottom line is, we own our data. We just don't do anything with it.
Yeah. We have to come up against even some of the terminology, which is known by organizations and marketers, terms like first-party data. So, that might lead someone to think, okay, well, if I'm collecting that as a company, or Google's collecting it on my behalf and passing it to me, that, okay, no, I do have it. And your point is that's a myth. Whether or not you have it is not the same as whether you own it. The person whose activity spawned that data always owns it, right?
That's right. That's right. That's always the case.
But how does that, I would think that a lot of companies would be put in a conflict of interest then because they believe that if they want to do marketing and advertising, that they must have some sense of who their customer is. And if they know nothing about it, they're taking shots in the dark. So are are they able to actually do any marketing without harming the consumer that they want to get this data from?
I think that I don't think that there's a paradox there, or opposite forces, that are irreconcilable. I just don't believe that. What I'm saying is that the data has value, and you as the owner should manage it proactively. You should also, and in the future you will, have the right to put a value on that data. Now, some companies, some marketing firms won't want to pay what you want to ask for your data, and other people will be completely blissfully ignorant of it and allow people to use their data for free. So, it's a mix, and people in the world have choices, and that's what I want them to do, is exercise their free will. But, there's going to be plenty of data that people don't manage, that companies and marketing agencies and firms will be able to use to target, to their consumers and message to their consumers accurately. Even if we cleaved off, 50% of the data that's out there today, you'd still have plenty to use to analyze things. I just think that the consumers could do a better job in managing it. And still, there'll be lots of people that do believe that, free Gmail is worth Google having all their data. I don't agree, but that's my opinion, and that's their opinion, and that's fine. We can all have different opinions. It's good. So lots of people will still want to have free services. They'll want to have Facebook for free, and they will hand over their data to Zuckerberg and company gladly.
Right. And I think if not all the users of this podcast, most of them are going to be people with, small, medium, large size companies, but not those trillion-dollar Silicon Valley intermediaries. So leaving them out of this for a second, when we're trying to do this, what you're helping me appreciate is this is not just a light switch, that if I can stake a claim to my consumer that by giving me some information, I can maybe make their web experience better on my website, or
Sure.
the delivery of my services. If they call my call center, I answer it and I speak to them by first name. These are things that people, do consider virtuous. So we can do that. By the same token, and you pointed out quite rightly, that in order to do modeling in large numbers, a company doesn't need nearly as many data points as we think. That you can do it on just 2 or 3 to triangulate.
Yes, exactly. We've come a long way. When you and I started out in this business decades ago, it was hard to scrap together the different data sets that we wanted, and it was almost impossible to integrate it. Well, we've gotten really much better at that. We can bring together multiple sources of data. We can integrate it very well. We've gone through, decades now of traditional AI. Soon we're coming up, we're in the middle of generative AI exploding right now. And soon we'll have causal AI as well. And through that entire life cycle, what we've really come around to understanding is that we don't need as much data as we thought we did. We can model on much smaller data sets and time series than we ever thought before. And we're coming up at a time where we can accurately and consistently and sustainably generate synthetic data. So really, a lot of companies don't even really need your data. We can look at the demographics of Canada and the United States, Western Europe, China, Australia, and we can model the population and what they do without having any data from any natural people.
Okay, so just to make that clear then, what you're saying is if an AI requires a lot of data and we have only partial data, that synthetic can come to the rescue and round it out enough so that the modeling tool, which doesn't care what it's looking at, really, is able to make inferences and surface insights that will be accurate, even if some of the data wasn't real.
That's right. That's right. And synthetic data, we're fairly early in the whole evolution of this phenomena. You hear Sam Altman talk about it. You hear a few companies in Silicon Valley talk about it. You hear some advanced analytics professionals talking about it. But for the most part, the marketing agencies and folks like that are still working on data. I say it both ways. I find myself switching back and forth, and they still work on data from natural people. And that's fine. And that's great. And to my point in the book, the point I'm making is that you want them to do that. Because if you are a person like I looked around and I said, okay, I'll do some modeling. And if I put a certain level of monetary value on my data and there were the data exchanges and things like that, I'd make about $1,600 a year for doing just what I do. And I only use maybe 3 apps on my phone and a couple, applications on my PC. So, if you were really out there going crazy, and you put a reasonable value on your data, you could make a lot of money. I mean, some people have said to me, oh, $1,600, what is that, John? And I said, well, for you, maybe nothing. For me,
Yeah.
I'd still, if someone put $1,600 on the table and said it's yours, I wouldn't walk past it without picking it up. But for some people, $1,600 is food for their children. It's their school supplies. It's gas for their car. It's the repair on their car. It's a lot of different things. I wouldn't be so flipped that $1,600 isn't a measurable amount of money.
You say in the book that you believe that this will become something that is the norm. And yet, it's acknowledged through things like Pew Research, which does surveys, that even though people might be excited by the monetary benefit, that we've got to overcome kind of an apathy or almost a numbness that seems to affect people, where they've kind of either given up or they just don't think it's possible that they could have a voice as consumers. And that's a commentary in and of itself on where we are as a society. But what do you see when you look at things like the Americans in Privacy study as rays of hope for how we might be able to get out of this sense that we just can't do anything?
Yeah, I don't think people have given up because they've never tried. So if you haven't tried, you can't give up what you haven't tried.
True.
So what I look to as hope and a brighter future is Europe. And the EU has passed the Data Act, they've passed the AI Act, they've passed the Markets Act, they've passed all sorts of legislation that is coming online. If you look back to GDPR, which has been on the books for 6 years now, none of the bad things that all the the naysayers, the Cassandras were out there saying, none of that happened. None of that stuff happened. And now we have California with their legislation. We have probably 6 or 7 other US states that have basically cloned GDPR and said, hey, this is the way you have to handle people's data. That's going to happen all across the United States. It'll happen all across it's done in Western Europe. It'll happen in the UK. It'll happen in Canada. It'll happen everywhere. So as those move on and move forward, this is going to be a cultural change. And one of the only bodies in the world that could do this is national governments and transnational governments, if you think of the EU. Yep. So they are making those changes. So the data exchanges, the data brokers, the data brokers will become data exchanges in some extent, and the data dividend will all happen. It will all happen. It'll be mandated by law and regulation. So, as I say in the book, we don't need a significant portion of the population to believe in this. We need a motivated minority to engage in it, because word of mouth will take this a long way. And this may take 10 years, it may take 12, it may take 15. It may not happen in my lifetime, but I believe it will happen. Is that when I sit down and I monetize my data and I say, okay, I don't like this, I don't like Exxon or whatever. A lot of people don't like oil companies, and I don't say to Exxon that you can't use my data. What I say is you can use my data, but every time you touch it, you have to pay me $1 million. Now, paying for people's data is almost like music royalties. You get a tenth of a penny every time Stairway to Heaven is played or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. If you play Stairway to Heaven 16 million times a week, it adds up. So, by putting values on the data that are targeted to certain companies, you are sending a message. You're saying to Exxon, I hate you. And maybe you then say, all right, for my browsing data or my health data or my phone records or whatever, you have to pay me a penny every time you use it, or a tenth of a penny or whatever it is. Okay. And then, your data dividend is growing, and you say to yourself, you know what? This is money that I wouldn't normally count it on, and I'm probably not going to use it for anything else. But every time my account gets to $2,000, and donate the entire balance to Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's plenty of ways to do this. It's not a binary, you can't use it or you can use it. There's ways to send messages. There's ways to be philanthropic. There's ways to do good. This is a nuanced messaging platform that consumers can actually use to have a voice in the marketplace that says, hey, Doctors Without Borders, you get all that money. Or maybe, I don't know, some other company that you do like, L'Oreal, maybe you love L'Oreal for some reason, you're actually going to pay them to use your data. You could do that, which doesn't make any sense to me, but you could.
Well, yeah. I mean, once you're into that, it's got economic value. The nice thing is that it works in all directions. In other words, once you move it out of the zero, penalty box, there's things that can happen in any direction. Think of a data breach. Okay, company, I trusted you. You breached my trust. You betrayed my privacy. Pay up.
That's right.
And we are seeing class action lawsuits that are doing this. So the company, if, they can't have it both ways. They can't say that the data is, worth something to you, but not worth something if they, let it loose. So if it's got value in any way, shape, or form, then they have to govern that value. They need to think about, will their CFO need to put a very big liability on the books for potentially having to pay out on a breach, right? So they now they're into the question over in marketing saying, well, you know what? We'd rather not have that data because the cost on our balance sheet is too high.
Too great.
Too great, right? So, but it's this mind shift of saying the data has intrinsic value, or maybe you put it even better in the book where you say that we as individuals have intrinsic privacy. It is, so, to use an American phrase, an inalienable right. Right. And other, right, governments around the world, modern governments, democracies, do all have in their constitutions this sense that, you do have those rights. And if data is seen as being one of them, then this is now this is where I'm getting a little bit more enthused to your idea, because those, the impetuses that could get this going are already there. They've been there for centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk in the book about the Sumerians. We find tablets that the Sumerians counted, vessels of wheat and vessels of wine, and that's been around for 2,300 years. Data has staying power. These people that, unfortunately, some young people taking pictures of different parts of their bodies and sending them off. These are bad choices. This data is going to be around forever. You just can't, say that it's ephemeral, because it's not. But, to take off into another angle or another aspect to think about it is that, these laws that are predominantly in the EU right now also have provisions for right to be forgotten. So you can go in and say, I don't want you to have any of my data. Now, let's be clear. There's some data that companies have to hold for regulatory purposes or reporting or legislation or whatever. So they're never going to be able to delete all your data. You are not going to be invisible. But you can go in and say all my transactions or all my usage data or all the prices or the payments I've ever made, whatever you can legally, erase, that company has to erase it.
Right.
And you can also tell them, I want a complete copy of every record and every field you have about me forever. Now, you really want to be a pain or a thorn inside of it. You send in a bunch of data requests. That's going to make you unpopular.
And yet, depending on where you live, there are many jurisdictions where you have that right. Yeah, for sure. I want to talk a little bit more about how this affects companies, how it might affect even the Silicon Valley giants. But before we do that, let's take a really quick break. Do you have a lot of company data in Reach, but struggle to get useful business insights out of it? Do you open up your Google Analytics but find you're at a loss on how to get it reporting the way you want? Do you wonder what new marketing strategies you could leverage if you could just unlock what's in your data? If you said yes, then you sound just like other clients did when they started working with me. Many B2B companies who I've done project work with have been helped by modernizing their analytics. Should you be ready to begin a project, let's talk about what you would like your analytics to do for you. Please reach out today via the podcast feedback channels or connect with me, Hey Glenn S, 2 N's on Glenn, on either Twitter or Instagram or on LinkedIn. Okay, let's get back to the show. All right, John. So the ways that companies have been using data, I guess, if they read your book, they admit that maybe they've crossed the line a couple of times. They've maybe slipped, put a toe over it, and gone into areas where they've treated a user's data without respect. You make no bones about the fact that you consider the Silicon Valley giants to not have just put their toe over the line, but to have hit the gas and taken it, way farther than it really should be. Would you be just fine if, like some of those companies argue, Facebook will take out full page ads when iOS decides to, restrict or to give the user some choice over what data is shared. Google is currently really dragging their feet on how long until they get rid of third-party cookies on Chrome. Do you care at all? Do you think that these companies will even survive if we get really dedicated to privacy and acknowledging that we have the power over that data?
I think those companies will survive and do just fine.
You're not shedding a tear for them.
Yeah, I have no sympathy for any of them. They'll do just fine. They're like cockroaches, they'll still be around. I just want people to be able to look at this with a clear-eyed view and just say, hey, I don't want them to have my data. Or, I can actually pay for something that I couldn't pay for before if I set my monetary values correctly. And one of the things about this ecosystem is that these data exchanges, will be middlemen. They'll be mandated by law. They won't be able to buy or sell data. All they'll be able to do is connect to the people that have the data and make it accessible to the people who own the data. And you'll be able to go in and say, you can't look at any of my health records, or you can look at all my telephone records, but you have to pay this amount of money for it. Or you can look at my browsing data and my purchasing data, but not together. You have the ability to do all that kind of stuff. So, I want people to understand that, yes, while now, I talk to people and they go, oh, just too hard, too impossible. You have to envision the future that's coming, and, that will take, like we said, a lot of people will be apathetic, and Google and Facebook and all those people will have all their data, and that's fine, and even if it's a majority of the people, the Google and Facebook will be fine. They won't change anything. But even if a minority of people do it, it'll take that data off the table. It'll change the data ecosystem. It will send a strong message to, companies on how they treat data.
Yeah, or if it happens enough in, let's say, one sector, then those Silicon Valley companies will have a harder time going to advertisers in that sector and say, we know how to get in front of your crowd. They will then have to innovate, which is, hey, they got there in the first place by disrupting and innovating, so they know how to do it.
Yes, they could be disrupted too, so it's fine.
Right, exactly. No one is immune. You talk about the difference, though, just on that kind of apathy. You talk about the difference between freedom of choice and freedom from choice. Just, can you help us understand how you would like consumers to just have that choice and to kind of know what they can do? That subtlety right there might even just be enough to galvanize some to act.
Yeah, well, freedom from choice is being apathetic and asleep. And some people choose that, and that's fine, and I have no issue with that whatsoever. But what we're talking about and what I'm advocating for is freedom of choice. Be able to understand what's going on and make an active choice. I'm going to give everybody my data and I don't want any money for it. Okay, fine. Good point. No problem. But, or I want to look at this in an open-hearted, honest, clear-eyed way, and I want to make choices that are good for me. Then I think that's wonderful. And that's what I want people to do.
And this actually gets back to such simple civic roots, I think. I mean, like think of people maybe meeting in a public space and saying, well, we have, this kind of interesting space here. Maybe we should spruce it up a little, maybe a park bench over there and a tree here and, a little bandstand. And, we have known how to do this for very, very long, but we've allowed that same thing when we do it online for there to be some, outside party that says, okay, well, I'm just going to sit here with like a huge megaphone or a big listening device, a parabolic dish, and I'm going to capture everything that you two are doing, but not give anything of myself. And you're just saying, well, no, actually, if they're party to this, they need to do their part.
That's right. They need to share. I mean, it's, what's that one book? Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten.
Right.
I mean, come on, you're taking all this data, you're hoarding it or storing it. Hoarding is a harsh word. I shouldn't say that, but you're collecting this data, you're integrating, you're in a unique place in the ecosystem. You're making billions of dollars a year. You're hugely profitable. You could share a little bit.
So that action, as we take it, you talk about, being part of data exchanges. I was reminded, and it was another person who came on this podcast called John Hinderleiter, and he reminded me that there actually are bodies, and they were more vocal in the early days of the internet. These are ones like ICANN and W3C. They were set in place to actually allow things like voting to happen. Voting on should a domain be given to this institution or that institution. Things like should the tracking of the information on that website go here and there. And, we just let a couple of individual players kind of come in and usurp that power. But again, the kind of laws are on the books that if we turned to ICANN or W3C and said to them, okay, we are now giving you new roles using the powers you already have. You have to set up these exchanges, make sure that they, work nicely within the existing ecosystem, and they play their part just like all the other things that you have set up, like third party or top level domains, right? Like we could just, the internet isn't fixed. We've been building it all along.
We're not far away from that connection being made, because the laws in the EU are heading in that direction. So California could do it. They seem to be more progressive thinking than most places. So, we have the books, the rules on the books for ICANN and W3C and other places. We have the laws on the books with the EU and some US states. They're coming closer and closer together. It's not as far away as some people think.
No. There are even, and I said we were going to talk about advertisers, but there are even things that advertisers are doing basically because they consider this user data so important that they don't want to share it with all other parties. So I'm not sure if you've heard of data clean rooms, but these are, software tools and other parties whose job is to anonymize data, pass it along to, let's say, the, demand side platform like a Google to be able to run ads, but not give them the keys to the kingdom while they hand over that request for inventory.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one of the things that, in my previous job that we did is that we never used any PII or PHI in our modeling. It was just a policy that I set. And most of the time, you don't need that stuff anyway.
Could you remind us what those are?
Oh, personally identifiable information and personal health information.
Right.
We never used any of it in our modeling because we didn't need it. There's plenty of other data that shows what your behavior is and in your behavior as an individual, an anonymized individual, or in an aggregate for a group of people. That's what you really need for advanced analytics and predictive modeling. You don't need to know it's Glenn or John or Tim or Susie or Sally, or you don't even know you need to know where they live. There's lots of ways to do this that would make this whole environment a lot safer for everybody if companies just did it.
Yeah. And it can happen, as you say, on an individual basis. And as I was thinking about it, some other examples came to mind where we simply turn to, again, the Silicon Valley companies who are running things like real-time ad auctions, and we just flip it around. We do what Priceline did for hotels. We say, okay, you want to reach some, male in the Chicago vicinity, but you don't know who they are, and you don't have a means of getting in front of them right now. They have put this price on their information. Do you want it? Yes or no? Right?
Yeah,
Do you want
exactly.
that access? Yes or no? Pay up.
Yep.
And
You can certainly do it.
because the auction is real time already. I mean, they have figured out how to jump through all sorts of hoops just to appear in front of you and I on a search results page. So their argument doesn't hold any water when they say, oh, well, this is too complicated. Complicated? You've already done something amazingly complicated. This is simple.
That's right. That's right. I agree completely. The whole diversion of it's too hard is just a diversion.
Yeah. I do want to just go into a few areas that we might have to stick handle around as they happen. This is happening in the field of AI right now, where there's a lot of talk of open source versus things that are written and that are clear. Do you come down on one side or the other of this, or do you think that we will need to see experimentation happen, maybe jurisdiction by jurisdiction, before we start to get this close to right?
Yeah, I'm a capitalist and I am a free market individual. So I do want things to be a competition in the marketplace. And I do think that we're far away from understanding the true value of generative AI. And we don't even really understand causal AI at this point. So the whole idea that we need to lock it all down and stop the experimentation, I think, is misguided. I think we do need to do a better job in governing and using data more responsibly. But as far as locking down AI, I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be to understand it completely, to be able to govern it effectively.
Yeah, and because we can make that AI perhaps prey on some members of society, maybe just giving them way too much dopamine with the types of things that they're doing as they work on the internet. I did think that there could be an edge case of us needing to figure out the governance of not allowing individuals who are putting out a lot of data, but that they are too incentivized to put out that data. Something similar to tragic cases of people who, for example, are offered to go down to a local clinic and get money for donating blood. But let's say that there's a substance abuse issue. They're going down and doing that far too much because it's really just the money that they want. So I think we'll have to look at some situations where
lots of interesting edge cases and scenarios to talk about. There's no end to that conversation.
But in the main, there are some simple things that you provide in the book, and you actually explained it through the course of telling what personally you were doing and things you were noticing that caused you to write the book. But there are some simple things that you give us as ways to stamp out the egregious uses of our own data where we're just allowing it to be used and we're not actually putting any stopgaps in place. Can you tell us what those might be?
Yeah, there's some very simple things. We're in Chicago. We've gotten on every do not mail list possible, and we've cut our physical mail down because I'm talking about data of all types. Most of the time, we've been talking about online data, but offline data is just as pernicious. So we've gotten on every do not mailing list, and a lot of times we get like a letter a day. We don't get many catalogs. We don't get much junk mail. We've cut down on our carbon footprint in that area. Number two is, back to the online world, is on your mobile phone. If you have apps that you don't use anymore, I really don't talk about this in the book, but, delete them, get them off your phone. There are many apps out there, and most people don't understand this, that even if they're not active, they allow companies to harvest data off your phone. So, if there's things that you're not using, you once used, but you're not using now, get rid of them, delete them. Another is, just don't blindly click on accept all cookies. At least go through the phase of doing manage cookies and go in there and if you want to use a service and there are some essential cookies that you have to accept, okay, fine, accept them. But don't accept any of the other ones. A lot of those have terms of service that you don't understand. And it says in many of those cases, I can harvest anything off your phone at any time. Which, do you really want them doing that? Another thing that that is, I've tried it and it's hard to do, is turn off location services. I mean, you use location services. We all do use location services more than you know. If you can turn them off, some cases that's good. And the last thing that I'll say is, don't put your phone by your bed. Don't sleep with your mobile phone on your nightstand. Turn it off, put it down in the kitchen, stay away from it. I mean, people are like, what do you mean it's near my bed? Well, do you really want Google knowing when you went to bed and when you got up and when you did it? Because, they're watching you through location services. So they know you went to bed at 10:30, then they know you got up at 7:30. Do you really need them knowing that? I don't think you do.
Or also that you are using the last moments before you sleep and the first moments when you wake up to, again, hit those dopamine sources, and allow them that amount of your mental real estate.
True. Absolutely true.
I mean, there's still other things in the book that we didn't even have time to cover. Those are some really, really good ones. Again, the location services, have to say I was quite surprised and dismayed when you pointed out that even tying location services against one other data point, like browsing, that is providing profiling on a level that would have made Arthur Nielsen cry.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
we just dismissively do it. And
we don't even think about it. We just let it happen.
Right? But if we did these little small things, or I guess just to finish with maybe the largest services, like, maps are handy, and maybe keeping in touch with relatives on Facebook is handy. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're the product. We have to have our eyes open.
That's right. And that's the whole point. Do what you want to do, be free, have free will, be freedom of choice, make your choices, and whatever they are, I support you. Hallelujah. You're free to do whatever you want. You're free to be a prisoner of any service that you want to imprison you. So but be aware that that's what's happening.
And as a person who works in fields where you help marketing organizations use this data to grow their businesses, you still would say to all the marketers hearing, look, the future is going to be okay, even with all these things in place.
Sure.
You're going to have enough to do commerce.
Oh, absolutely. There'll be plenty of data out there for us to use for all different purposes. There might be less than we would like, but we're very creative. We're very resilient. We're very smart people. We'll make it work.
And we did business before we had any of this.
That's right.
So it's definitely something that if we didn't have that kind of free manipulation of data in our lives, we probably wouldn't miss it.
That's right. Exactly.
Perfect. John, if people want to find out about the book or what you do, where would you send them?
If you're looking for the books, all on Amazon, Data for All, that's an easy one to find. My new book came out 2 weeks ago now, Causal Artificial Intelligence, and it debuted as number 2 in the business book category on a global basis. So I was very proud of that. So Amazon's the best place to go for books. And then LinkedIn. John Thompson on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. I'm posting all sorts of good and bad ideas all the time.
John, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for listening.
For sure.
Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.